Hey guys, we have a little background music. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but my kids are like listening to music right on the other side as well. So we're on the last chapter of Failing Forward. It's taken me a few days to get to this chapter. I don't know why, but we are on chapter 16, and it says, "Now you're ready to fail forward." So, failure is the hallmark of success. It can be the starting point of a new venture, such as when a baby learns to walk, it has to fall down a lot to learn the new skill. Failure is also the mark of a success you've worked for. When a pole vaulter finally misses in competition, it shows how far he's come. That failure becomes the starting point for his next effort, proving that failure is not final. Dave Anderson said that. All right, well, now you know all the steps it takes to fail forward. Let's review them again quickly. Number one, realize there's one major difference between average people and achieving people. Number two, learn a new definition of failure. Number three, remove the you from failure. Number four, take action and reduce your fear. Number five, change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. Number six, don't let the failure from outside get inside you. And number seven, say goodbye to yesterday. Oh, we're still going. Turn the page. Number eight, change yourself and your world changes. Number nine, get over yourself and start giving yourself. 10, find the benefit in every bad experience. 11, if at first you do succeed, try something harder. Number 12, learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. Number 13, work on the weakness that weakens you. Number 14, understand there's not much difference between failure and success. 15, get up, get over it, and get going. I believe wholeheartedly in these steps, but they probably won't mean a thing to you unless you see them in the life of somebody that you consider to be a lot like you. Let me introduce you to a friend of mine named Dave Anderson. That was the quote at the beginning. Dave is an entrepreneur I met at a leadership conference that I taught in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his story. And along the way, I'll point out how many of the events in his life correspond to the steps in failing forward that I've outlined in this book. Let's start with Dave's profile. Famous Dave Anderson's profile. Net value, 30 million. Education, master's degree from Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government. Current position, chairman, Famous Daves of America. 3,000 plus employees. Annual sales, 41.6 million. Family status, married with 2 children. Career highlights, founded Famous Daves of America and took the company public. IPO shares opened at 6.25 and closed at 11.25 the first day. Co-founded the Rainforest Cafe and took it public. Named Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year by Ernst & Young, sponsored by NASDAQ and USA Today. Past director and executive vice president of Organization Judge, the fastest growing company in America by Fortune magazine. Participated in 2 presidential studies, Jimmy Carter's task force to study problems of minorities and small businesses, and Ronald Reagan's Commission on Indian Reservation Economies. He helped create more than 18,000 jobs so far in his career through his vision, leadership, and ability to see opportunity. Founder and chairman of the Mino Gizig Endowment Fund for Disadvantaged Minority Children. Initial gift was 1.4 million. Executive mentor, Carlson School of Business MBA program at the University of Minnesota. I didn't know there was a Carlson School of Business. That's a pretty impressive resume, and it doesn't even take into account the dozens of local and national culinary and business awards Dave has received, or his accomplishments as a silversmith and antique collector. Everything Dave has ever touched has turned to gold, right? Wrong. To really understand and appreciate Dave's achievements, you need to know more about his failures. A typical teenager. When Dave Anderson graduated from high school in 1971, he was like many other 18-year-old kids. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. And if you had suggested to him back then that he would someday be a successful businessman worth tens of millions of dollars, making a positive impact on the lives of thousands of people, he probably would have thought you were crazy. Yet that's what has happened to him, and it's all because he's a man who learned how to fail forward. Dave grew up in the city of Chicago. He was an average student, and when he got out of school, he was looking for direction. He wasn't much of a people person, so he was thinking in terms of finding a career where he could be outdoors and be closer to nature. Because of his Native American heritage, his father is Choctaw and his mother is Chippewa, he considered a career in wildlife and forestry. He went to Michigan Tech University in Houghton, I don't know how to say that, Michigan, and started living the typical college experience, some classwork and studying during the week with lots of partying on the weekends. Opportunity came calling. During the break after his first term, he went back to Chicago to visit his parents, and a friend called him. Dave, he asked, you got a suit? Yeah, you know I do, Dave responded. He'd grown up going to church, and in those days that's what you wore. Well, put it on and I'll pick you up, his friend said. Back then, Dave was ready for anything, so he put on his suit, and when his buddy picked him up, they went to a meeting recruiting people to sell an oil conditioner for automobile engines. Dave wasn't a mechanically inclined guy, so the technical part of the presentation didn't connect with him. But he was really excited by the speaker, a fellow named Zig Ziglar, who told him and the other men and women in attendance, if you believe in yourself and have passion, you can succeed. Dave had never really heard anything like that before in school or at home. His parents loved him, but they didn't know much about positive motivation and they weren't entrepreneurs. His dad was a construction worker who worked hard at his job and encouraged his son to do the same. That night, Dave went home and talked to his parents about the opportunity of selling that product. And when the company held its next meeting, Dave went back and took his dad along. It seemed like a viable opportunity to him, and he certainly wanted to see his son succeed. So he put 2,500 of his hard-earned money into buying the product for Dave to start him in business. Dave's first business. Dave never went back to Michigan Tech. For the first time in his life, he had a dream, and he had bought into it 100%. He wanted to be a success and make it in business. For the next few months, he worked as hard as he could to sell that oil conditioner, but it was as if he'd hit a brick wall. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't make it work. It was his first business failure. Dave says that as far as he knows, his dad still has a few cases of that oil conditioner stockpiled somewhere in his garage. But contained within that first big failure were seeds of his future success. Step 15, get up, get over it, and get going. First, he had hope. He believed that he could be successful. Step 6, don't let the failure from outside get inside you. Second, when his dad bought the product for him, Dave received a 5-day leadership course that he says changed his life. Step 10, find the benefit in every bad experience. He also was given 6 tapes by Zig Ziglar. Every night for months, Dave went to sleep listening to those tapes. Step 8, change yourself and your world changes. And the dream within him wasn't dead, and he wasn't going to let that failure get him down. Step 1, realize there's one major difference between average people and achieving people. He just wouldn't realize success through that business. After failing as an oil conditioner entrepreneur, Dave went to work part time selling sporting goods for Eddie Bauer. And in the fall of 1972, he enrolled in Roosevelt University in Chicago. For the next several years, like clockwork, Dave enrolled at Roosevelt in the fall and ended up with a bunch of zeros and incompletes on his transcript. He had the desire to improve himself, but a weak aptitude for school, coupled with the demands of various business ventures, caused him to fail in his desire to get an education. Another venture. It was also in 1972 that Dave got the idea for another business. Although the oil additive opportunity didn't work for him, it encouraged him to start thinking like an entrepreneur. Step 2, learn a new definition of failure. His idea was to create and sell miniature dish gardens. He scraped together a few dollars and bought the materials to make up a few samples. Then he went out and talked to retailers trying to get them to buy them. Dave had his first bit of success when James Ashner at Richard Lang Florist. He told Dave, these look good. Okay, let me have a dozen of this one, a dozen of these, and a dozen of these, pointing to his favorites. Dave was stunned. That's a lot of money, he said, quickly calculating the cost of materials in his head. How about one of each? No, said Ashner. I want a dozen of these, a dozen of these, and a dozen of this one too. You sure you don't just want to take one of each? Dave offered timidly. He figured that if he could sell and deliver a few of his samples, he would have enough money to buy supplies. No, Ashner replied simply. I can't get you a dozen of each, Dave finally explained. I don't have enough money to buy the materials to make them. Well, you look like an honest guy. What if I pay you up front? Would that help? Ashner answered. Anne Marie, he called to his assistant in the next room, write this guy a check. Dave was dumbfounded. A few minutes later, in his hands was the largest check he'd ever held. It was for $736.35. Another gain. That was the day Dave started his wholesale florist business. For the next 7 years, he operated out of his basement and worked like a madman. He put in long hours, 7 days a week. With his retail florist customers experienced their heavy crunch, when his retail florist customers experienced their heavy crunch times around Mother's Day and Valentine's Day, he went into their shops, swept up, cleaned out coolers, and did other chores to help them out. By age 21, he had accounts with every major retail florist in the city of Chicago. By his late 20s, he felt like a tremendous success. Around that time, a florist friend had an idea to make some extra money. Back in the late 70s, students at universities liked to decorate their dorm rooms and apartments with plants. Dave's friend, whose son attended Southern Illinois University, figured that they could buy plants cheap from the grower in Florida, rent space in the student union at the beginning of the fall term, and sell the plants at a hefty profit. And that's what they did. They drove to Florida with a semi filled up or with a semi, filled it up with plants, brought them back. They were able to eliminate two middlemen from the process, mark the plants up in price, and still sell them for much less than the usual retail price. They made $20,000 in 2 days. Step 11. Step 11. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. And another loss. Because that venture had brought such success, they were ready to try it again, but this time on a larger scale. A new Kmart was scheduled to open in Pontiac, Illinois in October, and they made arrangements to sell plants there. Dave and his friend went to Florida and brought back two semis full of plants. They rented a big tent, filled it up with plants, and set up four cash registers to wait on customers. But a funny thing happened that day. A strange fog drifted in. Then it started to drizzle. For long, the drizzle turned into a steady rain. That's when it suddenly turned cold. The rain became sleet and then snow. Winter had come early, and the tender tropical plants couldn't take it. They lost everything. The venture cost them the $20,000 they had made in the prior student sale, plus other money they had put into it. If you're from the Midwest, you probably remember the winter of 1979. It was one of the worst on record. The snowstorm that hit Chicago was horrible, and the drifts were so high that many side streets were closed for months. A lot of businesses went under that year, including Dave's. Florists don't buy much in the middle of a blizzard. Many of Dave's customers not only weren't buying from him, they also weren't paying him the money they owed for orders they had already received. That, coupled with the huge loss at Kmart, put him under. He filed for bankruptcy in search of new strength. After Dave lost his business, he needed to find a job to support himself. More than once, he had to pawn his wife's jewelry to pay the rent. Twice, he stood in line to file for unemployment, but he walked out, determined never to accept a check from the government. He kept looking. Because he had always worked for himself, he wanted to find something that would allow him to use his entrepreneurial spirit. But he also wanted something that would help improve himself. All successful people, he reasoned, had good people skills, and he felt that his ability to work with people still needed to be strengthened. Step 13. Work on the weakness that weakens you. Those two desires meant one thing. He needed to take a sales job, and that scared him. His fear of failure in that area was overwhelming. He landed a job working for the American Can Company selling Dixie cups, marathon paper towels, and tissues to restaurants. Step 4. Take action and reduce your fear. To get his foot in the door, he took the worst territory. At night, when his family was out of the house, he would practice talking, smiling, and even shaking hands with himself in front of a mirror. During the day, he worked hard. He relied on the same principles and tenacity he had in the wholesale floral industry. Step 14. Understand there's not much difference between failure and success. He made a lot of mistakes, experienced much rejection, and lost many sales. But he worked like crazy and kept learning. In 6 months, he took a territory that had been in last place and made it number one in the company. He learned a lot in that position. He discovered that you have to experience a lot of failure to achieve success. And the more failure you go through, the higher your success. He also discovered that his past failure didn't brand him for life. After I lost my wholesale floral business, I went back to some of the companies I had worked with before, says Dave. All I could think about was the thousands of dollars I owed them when I filed for bankruptcy. But they didn't care about that. Their thought was, "We wrote that off years ago. Besides, we made a lot more than that from you during our years doing business together." Step 7, say goodbye to yesterday. If you're honest and admit your failures, people are pretty forgiving. People want to help you if you take responsibility for yourself. Step 5, change your response to failure by accepting responsibility. Opportunity again. In 1982, Dave's tribe, Lac Orioles, the Lac Orioles, Lake Superior band of Ojibwa in northwest Wisconsin, came calling. Their organization was losing money, and recognizing his business prowess, they asked him to be their CEO. They put him in charge of a variety of businesses and interests, including a cranberry marsh, a print shop, and a construction company. He led the tribe's concerns for 3 years. During that time, gross revenues increased from 3.9 million to more than 8 million. His success with his tribe prompted President Reagan to recognize Dave in the Commission on Indian Reservation Economies. Various state and local government and business organizations honored him and asked him to sit on numerous councils for areas such as tourism and minority business development. In time, Dave was helping so many people that he was granted a Bush Leadership Fellowship for a lifetime of outstanding achievement by the Bush Foundation in St. Paul, Minnesota. That's how he got into Harvard, with no undergraduate degree and a transcript full of poor grades. After he graduated, he worked with the Mille Lacs tribe for several years. Dave helped them create thousands of jobs, bringing their previously devastating unemployment rate down to nearly zero, and helped build the company that Fortune magazine recognized as the fastest growing in America. Though Dave had achieved success in a variety of businesses, he had not yet done anything related to his true passion, which was food. Pursuing his love. Dave's love for food began when he was just a kid. His father worked at various construction sites around Chicago as an electrician, and he occasionally brought home leftover ribs from one of the storefront barbecue shacks introduced to him by a coworker. As soon as Dave tasted his first rib, he was hooked. And as soon as he was old enough to work, he started what he calls the quest for the perfect barbecue. Every place he traveled to around the country for business, he talked to the locals to find out where the best restaurants were. "I've traveled the back roads and side streets of this country, searching for great tasting food," says Dave enthusiastically. "I've been everywhere from storefront kitchens down inner city side streets to country road houses to fine dining restaurants. When I'd go to a convention after fulfilling my company obligations, I'd disappear and my coworkers would wonder where I was. I was in the best little restaurants in town. I'd order everything on the menu and taste it all. Then I'd go home and experiment in my own kitchen." In 1994, Dave co founded a highly successful restaurant company called the Rainforest Cafe, and it made him wealthy. He used some of the money he made to purchase a small resort in Hayward, Wisconsin. There, Dave built the kind of restaurant he'd always dreamed of having, one that made great barbecue. He was going to call it Dave's Famous Barbecue, but the printer made a mistake and printed Famous Dave's, and the name stuck. The restaurant was a huge success. Soon he opened a second Famous Dave's, then another. At this point, if you didn't know better, you'd think Dave was set, but he was on the verge of facing the lowest point of his life and his greatest obstacle, himself. He got the treatment. In 1995, a group of friends and family came to Dave in what's commonly called an intervention. In other words, they confronted him about his drinking. Dave had started drinking in college, as many people do, but he didn't leave it behind when he moved into the business world. When the people who loved him called him on the carpet, he was secretly pleased because he knew he needed to change. He went into treatment for alcoholism, and he's been sober ever since. The key to making it through treatment and succeeding is accepting that you have a problem, that you drink too much, accepting where you are and moving on from there, Dave asserts. The people who go through treatment and don't stay sober fail because they believe they're right. They won't take responsibility for themselves. The key to change is surrender. Dave knew he needed to change, and in the years since he turned his life around, he has seen lots of change in himself. Now, continual learning and growth are the hallmarks of his life. Step 12 is learn from a bad experience and make it a good experience. I realized that I couldn't hang around with my drinking friends and change, he says. If I went back to the bar where I used to drink, I know the same people would still be there sitting in the same places. They wouldn't have changed a bit, but I've changed a lot in 4 years. It's not about Dave. As I write this, Dave owns 24 restaurants in 5 states, and the business is still growing. But to succeed, he has had to overcome a lot of obstacles and a lot of doubters. So there's two charts of his sales and employees corporate growth. Gone way up. When I got started, people told me that my restaurants would never go in this part of the country, says Dave. They said Minneapolis is not a barbecue town. It'll never work. Well, today I've got 13 restaurants in Minneapolis. As incredible as Dave's achievement has been, what's even more remarkable is his realization that his success exists not for himself alone, but for others. He's doing that. He's doing that through the Mino Gizig Endowment Fund for Disadvantaged Minority Children, which he founded, and also through Famous Dave's. He confirms our business is more about changing lives than selling ribs. Step 9, get over yourself and start giving yourself. To help him accomplish that, Dave developed Hog Heaven University, where he trains his people. Their new managers. My kids are fighting. Hold on, I'm going to pause this. Okay. Sorry, had to put out some fires. Might be some more. We'll see. To help him accomplish that, Dave developed Hog Heaven University, where he trains his people. There, new managers learn skills, techniques, and information that will help them succeed at Famous Dave's, such as what Dave calls the Trinity of Barbecue: meat, smoke, and sauce. But they learn something else that's much more important. Dave tells all of them, this is not about Dave Anderson. This is your opportunity. A key part of that opportunity is knowing how to fail forward. Dave explains, schools teach the technical disciplines such as math and science, but not about mental health. What they need to teach is how to deal with problems. Every day you're going to get whacked and thumped with problems. Some of us get jackhammered, but to succeed, you have to be open to problems. You have to be open to failure. And as you go up the ladder, you gain the right to get more problems. The higher you go, the bigger the problems. But the most effective people have gone through the toughest times. They say you don't become a great sailor by sailing calm seas. The seas definitely haven't been calm for Dave in the past, nor will they be calm in the future. But that doesn't bother him. Obstacles are just opportunities. Dave emphasizes, I tell my employees all the time, most people run from problems. If you want to get ahead, go to your manager and say, you got problems? Give me some. Instead of running from problems like most people, go after them. If you do, I'll guarantee it will change your life. That's the way you get ahead, by solving problems. Now you're ready. Dave Anderson has made more mistakes, suffered more adversity, overcome more problems, and experienced more failures than most people you'll ever meet. But he has also achieved more. And as my friend Zig Ziglar declares, Dave Anderson is just getting started. The next time you find yourself envying what successful people have achieved, recognize that they have probably gone through many negative experiences that you cannot see on the surface. An old joke goes like this: never ask what's in a hot dog while you're eating one. The idea is that if you did know what's in it, you'd never want to eat one again. A lot of failure goes into success. If you really want to achieve your dreams, I mean really achieve them, not just daydream or talk about them, you've got to get out there and fail. Fail early, fail often, but always fail forward. Turn your mistakes into stepping stones for success. As I was finishing this book, I sent Dave the first draft of his story so that he could make sure I'd gotten the details right. A few days later, he sent a note. It said, I've never seen my life story so laid out before. It's a wonder I never gave up. Now that you know how to fail forward, you won't have to give up either. I wish you well. Keep dreaming and keep failing forward. It's the end. doesn't it make you like look at failure so much differently? Like we have to fail. We have to keep trying in order to fail and in order to succeed. It's just all part of it. They just go hand in hand. There's so many. I feel like just reading through is like not enough. I need to do a lot more like studying and writing down, and I don't know, it's kind of hard to do on here, but I think I'm going to go back and like re-listen to it and highlight and that book. Whew, so many good things. So many good things. I hope you guys got great nuggets out of it too, and that you can embrace when you feel like you're failing, just embrace it and don't hide, or maybe hide a little bit, but then come back. I know because I hide sometimes. I do. But you know what? As long as you keep coming back and keep trying, keep going forward, it's going to be okay. You know? I love you guys.